So, good evening, welcome to Mansfield College. My name's Helen Mountfield, I'm the principal, and it's my very great privilege to welcome you here to the 2018 Adam von Trott Memorial Lecture. We at Mansfield are honoured to hold this lecture each year to memorialise one of our most illustrious sons. And we are particularly honoured to have this year as our lecturer Thomas Oppermann, the Vice President of the German Bundestag. Before I turn to Mr. Oppermann, I want to say a little bit about Adam von Trott and his legacy and his links with our college. As many of you will already know, Adam von Trott was a lawyer by training, born in Potsdam, studied in Germany and Oxford, and travelled very widely. And at the age of 20, he was invited to a conference of the student Christian movement in Liverpool. And I wonder if he may have met my grandmother there, who was a Methodist and was also a member of the student Christian movement in Liverpool at that time, but history does not relate. He was offered a place at Oxford by Dr. Selby, who was the principal of Mansfield College at the time. At that time, it was a theology college in the nonconformist tradition. It had a lot of links with Germany and German theological ideas. And so during his term at Mansfield in the spring of 1929, Adam von Trott studied theology and politics and later said that this experience helped him to learn what democracy means. And we're proud of that because we think it reflects the spirit of the college today. We have a Human Rights Institute here. We have our statue of Eleanor Roosevelt, which was recently unveiled by Hillary Clinton. And we think that we are about what democracy means and what debate means in this college. So we're glad that that was what Adam von Trott perceived us to be about in 1929. And then he went on to study at Balliol College on a Rhodes Scholarship a few years later. Adam von Trott exemplified the difference between being a patriot and being a nationalist, which is an important distinction at the moment. He loved his country, but he abhorred the Nazis, and during the Nazi regime, he made plans for a post-war Europe with a federal structure and radical social reform. And indeed, he risked his life trying to pursue those ideas by making links with Allied governments to discuss them. And ultimately, in 1944, he was put to death as a central figure in the plot to assassinate Hitler. Dr. Andrew Chandler has said that Adam von Trott deserves to be regarded as one of the most symbolic presences in the history of Europe in the last century. He was a principled idealist and a committed internationalist. He knew the terrible cost of maintaining these values in a dangerous world. So that's why we think it is important to remember Adam von Trott and to celebrate his links with our college. The Adam von Trott Memorial Appeal was launched in 2004 on the 60th anniversary of Adam von Trott's death. And under the auspices of the Adam von Trott Trust, Mansfield has held annual lectures by very distinguished lecturers on themes relevant to the life and ideas of Adam von Trott, including one by our former principal, David Markand, who I think sadly can't be here tonight. He had intended to be, but he can't be here. So we're very grateful to the Adam von Trott Memorial Trust and also to the German Foreign Office, which contributes to the cost now of scholarships to enable young Germans to have the opportunity to study for master's degrees in politics at Mansfield College. And we're hugely grateful to the Memorial Committee and the Foreign Office for that generous financial support and for enabling us to host such exciting young German scholars here at Mansfield. So I'd particularly like to thank the German Foreign Office, who are represented tonight by Ralph Tieper and Susanna Franner from the Department of Culture and Education in the Embassy. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to introduce our current von Trott scholars for 2017 and 2018, who I know are here, although I can't see where they are. There's Kenneth Stiller and Franziska Brandman. There's Kenneth. Thank you very much, Kenneth, and we're very pleased to see you here. I am delighted to welcome in our long line of distinguished von Trott lecturers, Thomas Oppermann. As I've said, he is a distinguished German lawyer and alliance builder, and as I've said, since 2017, the Vice President of the German Bundestag. But before he gives his lecture, and then there'll be a chance for people to ask questions in the usual way, there are two other things I want to say. One is that there is a clipboard circulating. We hold these public lectures on a Friday evening, most Fridays in term time at 5 o'clock, on a wide variety of subjects. They're free, the lecturers are wonderful. We're very keen that people should feel this is part of their life and they can pop in whenever they want to. So if you would like to hear from us about what other lectures will be on next term, please give us your email address on the clipboard. We will only use it for that purpose. We won't use it for any other purpose. It is all fully compliant with the data protection general regulation. But we would like it if you knew what was on and fancied coming back. And I would also like to invite Dr. Paul Flather, who is an honorary fellow at Mansfield, to say a few words on behalf of the Adam von Trott Memorial Committee. Thank you.
Well, it's a great honour for me to add a special welcome on behalf of the Oxford Adam von Trott Memorial Committee. Many of the members are here, and many have been involved in its work longer than I have, and we're very proud of where we've got to. I also want to welcome especially our German students who've come from Göttingen and maybe one or two other universities. You're very welcome, and it illustrates the initiative that we want to do, which is to build friendship and collaboration. And we want to say a special thank you to our two very good friends, Andreas Busch, who's at Oxford, and his colleague Jacob Lars, and indeed Arnulf Quandt, who's also here. I also want to make a special welcome to Clemens von Trott, who is Adam's nephew, who's been a great supporter of our work and is invariably turns up to give us energy and enthusiasm for our work. I think Mansfield can feel very proud of this initiative. As the principal said, started on the 60th anniversary of the plot to kill Hitler. It has borne enormous fruit. We're delighted that 6 scholars have been supported already. But we're also very proud that, in a way, if I can be so bold, to say that we've actually stimulated our very special German friends to also remember and recognize the special contribution that Adam von Trott meant. I know that Göttingen has taken this memorializing very much to heart. It's had a wonderful lecture last week, and in previous years actually, and has named a room after him. So I think we can feel proud both of the actual initiative, but also stimulating a wider recognition. We know that we live in very troubling times, uncertain times, with the rise of what I call tribalism. I mean, in political science, people talk about populism. It's an attack on our liberal values. So now more than ever, we must stand up and defend our values, our cherished liberal values, and follow the example that Adam von Trott gave us. He was a great dissenter of his time, and this is a college of dissenters. So it's highly appropriate that he is, as the principal said, one of our great alumni, and that we're here to remember him, to celebrate his work, but also, most importantly, follow his example. My final point is a more mercenary one, if you'll forgive me. In these troubling times, of course, we're going to try and expand collaboration. We're trying to build friendships. We're going to remember internationalism. And I'm delighted that actually Mr. Oppenheimer has been very responsible in encouraging the German government to support further initiatives which we're going to be taking part in, a new bursary scheme and annual conferences, some of which will be held at Mansfield. So that's very exciting. But the mercenary point is that obviously in troubling times we don't know what's going to happen day to day. We don't know how our relationship with the European Union is going to continue, and we don't know whether the scholarship money will have to top up So we're putting out a leaflet which you'll find on your seats, and there is a donation form. And if anyone is able, either personally or indirectly, you know people that might be willing to support our work and our scholarship, we'd be very grateful. Jonathan Shaler, our honorary treasurer here, who keeps us in order and keeps the books, is the person to contact. You can also go on the website. So that's a final plea. But thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, Helen. It's a great honor to stand here at Mansfield College and to hold the von Trott Lecture. And I'm impressed how crowded the audience is, and the ones who are standing up there, I could tell you that down here there are a few more seats left. It might be more convenient. I would also like to welcome Professor Andreas Busch and Arnulf Quadt from Göttingen University. They were the ones who rediscovered Adam von Trott. In 2014, when we had the 70th anniversary of July 20th and the plot against Hitler, they decided to organize an event and asked me to hold a speech about Adam von Trott. I had known the name. I knew that he was one of the resistance fighters. But I had not known that he was an alumni of my own faculty. I'm a law student. I was a law student at the University of Göttingen. And I felt ashamed that as a student of that faculty, I didn't know that Adam von Trott was an alumni of that same faculty. So I read the major book, the major biography about Adam von Trott that was published about 10 years ago, and I learned a lot. Actually, it was like discovering a political treasury. I'm a member of parliament for 29 years now, and I've learned a lot about democracy, and it takes many things to have a well-functioning democracy. But two things are particularly important: values and role models. And if you read the biography about Adam von Trott, you find a lot of both. So I decided to support those two professors and also the foundation and the family von Trott to make sure that no student from the University of Göttingen, and maybe also including the University of Oxford, the colleges of Oxford, that no student should leave these universities and not knowing about who Adam von Trott was and what he did. That was my determination. And today I'm happy to be here to talk about Germany, Britain, and Europe, what prospects. The title of my lecture was defined when the invitation was confirmed December last year. So I figured the Brexit debate would go on, and that is still going to be interesting, but I had not anticipated that I arrive at London the very day when the debate about Brexit reaches a climate. And I had not anticipated that yesterday I would sit in the under gallery of the House of Commons and witness a parliamentary debate that is the sharpest debate I've ever seen. So the debate about Brexit is a very contemporary thing right now, and that is why my lecture deals with it. I'll never forget June 23rd, 2016, that day Great Britain decided to leave the European Union. It was by a tiny margin of 51.9%, and that people voted in favor of leaving. We had not expected the Brexit, and we were not prepared for it. For Germany, the leave of Great Britain is a painful loss. I would describe it this way. In the diverse orchestra of 28 EU members, the UK and Germany played the same instruments. Reasonable economic policy, fair trade, financial transparency, and fiscal discipline. We both know how to create successful economies. The Germans knew if Britain left, the balance of those crucial discussions in the Council of Ministers would change. We would lose a natural ally. The UK is Great Britain's second largest trading partner. German companies employ 250,000 people in the UK, and British companies employ 250,000 in Germany. Our military, our intelligence, and law enforcement agencies work closely together. Our scientists co-author more papers than we do with any country other than US. Apart from these more rational reasons, the result of the Brexit referendum was so disturbing for many Germans because they believe that Britons and Germans have quite a lot in common. Germans think that the British people are like us. Aren't we both beer-drinking, sun-chair-occupying, and football-loving nations? Isn't English a Germanic language too? The UK gave us the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and shaped the lifestyle of millions of young people for decades. And we did not forget that after World War II, it was the UK and Western allies that provided political support to and economic assistance to Western Germany under the Marshall Plan. At that time an outcast, it was generous to readmit Germany to the international community. We are grateful that you liberated our country in 1945 and installed a democratic system and the rule of law. I grew up in the western part, in the British sector of Germany, where the Brits still enjoy a great reputation. Britain is not only a loss for Germany, Brexit is not only a loss for Germany, but for the entire European Union. The EU loses a veto power on the UN Security Council with a great foreign policy competence and an effective diplomatic network and a political powerhouse with a long-standing political democratic tradition. So why did the Brits decide to leave the EU? And why would the Germans never do so? You can actually reveal many characteristics of our two countries if you describe the relationship of Germany and the EU on the one side and Great Britain and the EU on the other side. The British view on Europe has always been rather pragmatic than passionate. The main focus was on free trade and the internal market. Most Britons saw the EU as an international organization for economic cooperation. Even among pro-Europeans, there has only been limited support for the idea of the European Union as a political project. The reservations have much to do, of course, with geography. Surrounded by the sea, and the United Kingdom was protected for almost 1,000 years from devastating wars and destructive ideologies which have rampaged across the European continent again and again. By the way, the island location is another effect. There seems to be the illusion that the English Channel is wider than the Atlantic Ocean. following the motto, "Fog in the Channel, continent cut off." The two world wars did not create a fundamental break in the continuity of Britain's basic national story. They did not shatter their national institutions to the core and did not force them to rebuild the country from the bottom up. In contrast, for most of its history, Germany was not a geographically defined nation, but rather a cultural and linguistic concept, with constantly shifting separate political entities. It is interesting that after World War II, the idea of a united Europe was articulated and put forward by none other than Prime Minister Winston Churchill. However, Churchill's ideal of Europe did not include Great Britain. When the UK eventually entered the European community in 1972, it was not the beginning of a love story. Margaret Thatcher's "I want my money back" only 12 years later, and "Take back control" from the Leave campaign are reliable indicators of an ambivalent relationship. After 44 years, it was David Cameron who thought it was about time to resolve this ambivalence by a popular vote. Cameron wanted to repair the split of his party. He ended up with a split of his nation, of his country. Now there is a gap between Scotland and Northern Ireland, the Remain majorities, and on the one side, and England and Wales on the other side. And there is another fundamental gap between the younger and the older generations. It was widely noticed that the overwhelming majority of young people voted Remain, if they voted. To me, it was moving to watch that 500,000 people marching for Europe in London 1 month ago. The young people in Britain reject isolationism. They want to be part of the European family. They feel cosmopolitan. They see their future in a united modern Europe. And that's, by the way, that is exactly what Adam Trott stood for. Now let us have a look at the German perspective on the EU, which is a completely different story. After World War II, Germany was destroyed, divided, and irritated about its national identity. There was no need at all for any nationalism or militarism. Germans were happy that they had survived and had a deep desire for stability and friendly neighborship. From the very beginning, Europe was seen as a promise for peace and reconciliation. The common market became a success story and helped to bring about prosperity in Germany. We enjoyed open borders and free traveling. The Erasmus program was a fantastic advertisement for Europe. So let me summarize. European integration for us Germans meant freedom, democracy, and unprecedented peace and prosperity. That is why for a long time the EU has been an emotional project and has become part of our post-war national identity. It even found access into our constitution. In the preamble of our Grundgesetz, of our basic law, it is written, "Inspired by the determination to promote peace in the world, as an equal partner of a united Europe, the German people have adopted this basic law." So striving to protect the EU and making it better has become part of our national DNA, of our constitutional DNA, in a way. And mainstream Germany, therefore, is deeply convinced that we only do well if Europe does well. Do not misunderstand. I'm not talking about the idea of a United States of Europe. where 27 member states sooner or later melt down to one state, to one nation state. I'm talking about 27 member states sharing a unique type of transnational democracy that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, while keeping their national identity and their languages and their culture. So you can see the relationships of our two countries and the EU couldn't be more different. The question is, will that divide Germany and the UK? Heaven forbid. There is a folk song in Germany called "Divorce is painful." Scheiden tut weh. Some of you might know about this from private life, and you can see it in the Brexit negotiations and in the political debates. It does not make sense to comment on the daily changing state of Brexit, but and I would also say that it is not adequate for a German politician to tell the British people what to do. But this is definitely one of the most important decisions of Great Britain in this century that will be taken within the next month. And I can only say, whatever the decision will be, we have to respect it. Either leave or remain, but I can tell that everybody in Germany would be happy if the Britons would decide to remain or someday to come back. I can say you are welcome at any time. I'm deeply convinced that the Brexit must not poison our relationship. On the contrary, we have to work harder to maintain our friendship. We should not forget that our civil societies have strong ties. As a matter of fact, we have to rediscover all the good British, German, and British European initiatives that already exist, be it the famous friendship among the fans of FC Liverpool and Borussia Mönchengladbach, or the German-British Chamber of Commerce, or school exchange schemes, or twin towns. And we have to come up with new ones. For example, Georg August University and University of Oxford could extend their cooperation in the name of Adam von Trott. The Brexit is clearly a defeat for the European idea. But ironically, this defeat helps the rest of the EU in two ways. Brexit was a wake-up call for Europe. Europe has to change. Europe needs to get better. We urgently need to work on that. And we have big discussions now about a European army, about a European budget in the Eurozone, and about many other things. Second, the Brexit disaster is so disruptive and complicated that at least the governments of all EU member states are thoroughly scared of following the British example. So that has stabilized, in a way, the European Union. It didn't solve any problem, but nobody wants to leave anymore. That is the result of this development. Even member states like Poland and Hungary, whose politics are in deep conflict with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, do not think about leaving the European Union. A collapse of the European Union would not only have severe negative consequences for all of us, it would also endanger the European peace order. If the EU did not exist, we would have to create it right now. I have no doubts that the EU will survive. But no matter how emotionally one country is identified with the European Union, the EU is not an end in itself. So the decisive question is not, will the EU survive? The decisive question is, Will our model of liberal democracy and open society, of social market economy, be sustainable in a world of authoritarian rollback? That is a decisive question. And honestly, I don't have a perfect answer. First of all, what does liberal democracy mean? German Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier put it this way: democracy is neither liberal nor illiberal. Rather, democracy is either liberal or it does not exist. Illiberal democracy is a contradiction in itself. Contrary to the views that have recently been adopted in some parts of Europe, democracy does not exist without the rule of law and the protection of minorities, and it dies without human rights and civil liberties, and it stands and falls with the freedom of thought. Well, democracy is facing its most serious crisis in decades. According to Freedom House, 71 countries experienced a decline in political rights and civil liberties in 2017, and only 35 improved. The pressure on liberal democracies comes from inside and from outside at the same time. From the inside, right-wing populists challenge our system. Germany is unfortunately no longer an exception. For the first time since the 1950s, a right-wing populist party has been elected into Bundestag. How could that happen? Up to now, there have been a few attempts to establish a right-wing party, but that never worked because we had a broad consensus in our society: never again. But then the financial crisis shattered people's trust in the state, not only in Germany, but in all Western countries. Many people lost their jobs, their homes, and their savings that they had worked so hard for. As a consequence, people did not believe in the state's ability to protect their modest wealth from greedy bankers and speculators. Just as we were getting a grip on the consequences of the financial crisis, another crisis hit. Almost 1 million refugees came to Germany in 2015. This was a great humanitarian act, but it also caused problems for German society. Especially socially deprived people and low-skilled workers fear that migrants could take their jobs and cause higher housing prices. Other Germans, being confronted with a multi-religious society, develop aversions, for example, against the political and authoritarian Islam. But the rise of populism is also caused by the fear of globalization and digitalization, and the perceived lack of a strong state that is capable of protecting people from crime, violence, and terrorism. Populists systematically instrumentalize fear and insecurity. For no problem, they have a solution. But for every problem, they have a scapegoat. Every political statement can be traced back to the same pattern of bias. It is either anti-EU, anti-establishment, or anti-migration. What is the answer? I'm convinced that we need a strong and active state, as well as a strong civil society. A state that is not only creating, but also capable of a state which is not only able of creating law, but also capable of enforcing law. No matter if we deal with human traffickers who want to determine the right of migration, or multinational companies that try to evade taxes by shifting profits in low tax countries. In that sense, take back control is not completely wrong. But it should not mean closing the door for any kind of migration, but legal migration in a controlled way, so that the vast majority of people can accept it. Germany desperately needs young and talented people. Experts predict that without migration until the mid-30s, 6 million people will retire who cannot be replaced by young people entering the labor market. Therefore, we have to find a consensus on how to handle immigration from non-EU countries. So there is a lot to do. There is a lot to do to solve domestic problems. But liberal democracy is also under pressure from the outside. Leaders like Erdogan and Putin tried to split the EU and polarize our world. They are full of contempt for our way of life and our democratic values. China, as a global power, is a one-party dictatorship. In Brazil, the 5th largest country in the world, a right-wing extremist was recently elected president. Donald Trump, the supposed leader of the Western world, is hardly any better. He welcomed Brexit enthusiastically, and he believes his mission is to destroy multilateralism. He revoked the Paris Agreement to combat climate change, and he terminated the Iran nuclear deal. His unilateral course has weakened the Western alliance. I am convinced that unilateralism does not advance Germans or Britons in a globalized world. Economic cooperation, free trade, fighting terrorism, or climate change, all these problems cannot be solved on the national level. It is only possible if nations cooperate. Cooperation has been important for the past, but it is even more important for the future. No single country in the European Union is strong enough to successfully defend its model of economy and welfare state on its own. Europe is small, and it keeps getting smaller. The proportion of Europeans in the world population already declined from 20% in the 1950s to 10% today, and it will further decline to 6% by the end of the century. And European countries are projected to fall behind in the coming years economically also. Experts predict, due to demographic reasons, a decline of Germany's economic position in the world from being the world's 5th largest economy, which it is now, to becoming the world's number 10 in the next 30 years. Great Britain will fall back from 10 to 11. If we fall back, we must concentrate our power. We must always be strong enough to prevent countries like China and Russia from forcing upon us their model, their rules, their way of life. That is why we need an alliance of multilateralism, meaning strengthening the UN, the OSCE, and NATO, and the European Union. And if we don't want to be shifted around, we have to make sure to keep our economic strength and our competitiveness. Otherwise, I don't believe that China would be as tolerant as we are in these days. Let me conclude. Germany regrets that the UK wants to leave the European Union. But I'm convinced the relationship between Germany and Great Britain goes beyond the EU. Britain has always emphasized its special relationship with the United States. Now the UK needs to work on a special relationship with Germany and the European Union. America first, Great Britain first, Germany first, whoever first. That type of national egoism cannot be a role model for peacefully living together in the 21st century. Nationalism has never worked for the well-being of the people. However, there is nothing wrong with healthy patriotism. French President Emmanuel Macron made a clear and precise statement in Paris last weekend. Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism, and Helen also pointed out that thing. Our former federal president, Johannes Rau, put it this way: I never want to be a nationalist, but a patriot. A patriot is someone who loves his country. A nationalist is someone who is full of contempt for the other countries. I prefer to follow Willy Brandt, who once said, we want to be a people of good neighbors at home and in the world. And these quotes also reflect the legacy of Adam von Trott, the patron of this memorial lecture. He always stood up for the peaceful coexistence of peoples, for cosmopolitan dialogue with foreign cultures, for a just and stable world order. He was both a cosmopolitan and a patriot. He defended these values uncompromisingly, and he paid for it with his life. He was a role model back then, and he still is today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas, for a very interesting and inspiring talk. Your last remarks made me think of René Cassin, who was one of the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, who said, the more European I become, the more French I feel. And that contrasts with what our Prime Minister recently said, that either you're a citizen if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. And I do think that reconciling those identities has been part of the problem in our country. I have to say, I rather wished you'd been sent out on the stump for the Remain side in the referendum, but there we are. You might have persuaded a few people. But I just wonder how you think we might encourage people to understand that, and to understand that control isn't something that is centred in one place, that you can have multiple identities and different levels of control.
I think that's definitely one of the questions of these days. People in a globalized world do have different identities, and the question is indeed how to harmonize, how to reconcile the different identities of people. In Germany, we have, like in all other countries of the Western world, we have a renaissance of what we call Heimat. I don't know the translation of Heimat. That is feeling at home in some place. Heimat is the place where you grew up, where you have trust and confidence with your environment. You know the people, you know the geography, and now it is a new political trend to establish Heimat on the level of ministries. For example, the Christian Social Union urgently wanted to have a ministry for Heimat. Now they have it. But I think we have to take it seriously. Refugees have to find a new home, have to be integrated. How do we do that in these days? In Germany, for a long time, we were not quite certain how to do that. I believe we had no concept, because, we said we do not want to assimilate people. They have their right to live their own culture. And then we discovered that, that parts of that culture does not really fit with the German way of life. The authoritarian elements, for example, women did not like that at all. So we went through a learning process, and we said everybody can be happy and be lucky, a lucky person in Germany find a new home if they respect the basic rules of our constitution, which is respect for other people, which is freedom of religion, there are no disbelievers, which is equality of men and women. And if you cannot accept these basic rules, within that rules, everybody can, shape his or her own life. But if you do not accept the basic rules, you cannot be a citizen of Germany. And that is a clear message. I think it is necessary. It is necessary to give clear messages. And we haven't done that in the past, and we can do better now.
Thank you. Now, we have a very informed audience, and I'm sure there's lots of people with questions, so I can see a hand here. If you can just wait a moment, there'll be a microphone. Yes, there's a microphone coming here, and if you can say who you are, and then there's a hand there. Perhaps I'll take two questions together, and then.
I'm Donald Norwood. I'm a member of the von Trott Committee and also a previous von Trott lecturer. I've been to Göttingen and I met von Trott's two daughters. I therefore, for very personal reasons, found what you said extremely inspiring. I want to say on behalf of all the British people, if I dare to speak for all the British people, we are actually ashamed of our government. Oxford was solidly Remain, over 70% Remain. We have very strong links with Bonn and so on. And those of us who are of my age will never forget that when we grew up, the Germans were our enemies. Today, you are our best friends. And a shame on us that that has been forgotten. Now, what I want to ask you about is that Brexit is a great tragedy, but there were two good things that happened this week. One is your lecture. The other great thing which I'm really proud of is the way we commemorated the First World War. For the first time at the Cenotaph, we asked a German citizen, the president, to lay a wreath. 17 or 20 million people died in the war. They were not all British. But this is the first time we've remembered that you suffered just as much as we suffered. In fact, you suffered even more. Not only that, but in the service later on in Westminster Abbey, we asked the same president to read from the letter of John's Gospel about love for one another and to read it auf Deutsch. I'm very proud of the fact. Has this met with any response in Germany?
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll just take this question and then we can come back to Thomas.
French President Macron has argued for Europe to have a more active and independent defence and security policy, and he's already had some success in irritating President Trump. What's the position of yourself and your party on this question of European defence? What are the threats to Germany and to Europe? Does the main threat come from the east? Should we intervene more actively outside Europe, for example, in Syria? Tell us what you think about this.
Okay. Okay, first question, thank you very much for your politeness and friendliness. I was moved when Frank-Walter Steinmeier was in the Westminster Chapel. I went there today also. And it was a great sign of friendship by the British government or the Queen to invite Frank-Walter Steinmeier, 100 years after World War I, after the end of World War I, and actually that was an official reconciliation between Great Britain and Germany. Where we were friends already, but it took 100 years to have that also made clear now that we are reconciled. And I found that was a moving situation. And the response in Germany was very positive, of course. Even though I was not in Germany when that happened, so I did not get a full impression of the media response. But the Germans are grateful for having the Britons as friends and not as enemies anymore, definitely. And we have to live that friendship now, inside EU and outside EU. That should not damage our friendship, as I already said. And we have to come up with new ideas. Adam von Trott anticipated during the 30s, when Europe was in uproar, everybody was preparing for war and things like that. He anticipated the fascinating concepts like not the European Union, but something like the European Union. And that shows us that the future is open, and it is our responsibility to shape that future, and everybody can contribute. The Brexit is only well, it is an important decision, of course, because it's going to change many things, but that can be reversed, of course. A new generation can make a new decision. And now your question, I believe that, the most important leader of the European Union in these days is Emmanuel Macron, because, he showed that you can beat anti-European resentments, that you can beat populist parties by having a positive concept of the future and by having a positive image of the European Union or the European idea. And I think he generated a lot of courage and a lot of optimism. And therefore we urgently now, we have lost almost a year with the German government crisis going back and forth. We urgently need to reform the European Union. One of the big projects is what we call a union of defense. That is also part of the European treatments. And now, for Merkel, even went a step further and talked about a European army. I believe that we also have to find a consensus on foreign policy. Germany does not believe that military power can solve problems. It can avoid problems, that's for sure. And you need to be strong enough not to be dominated by anybody else and not to be attacked. But military intervention rarely doesn't solve any problem. We believe in political solutions. Germany does not have the understanding to be a superpower or a military superpower, and we don't have the capacity. We rather believe, and not the mentality, not anymore. And we rather believe that foreign policy should be designed to de-escalate violent conflicts, to economically cooperate, to enlarge developing aid for Africa and other parts of the world that need support. That is why we have a good reputation and a lot of trust. But we are also aware that without military deterrence and military force, and also the capacity to intervene in some situations, for example, Germany is in Mali now training and educating the soldiers, which is very important if you want to contain the spread of terrorism and militias in that area, which create more refugees. So we have to definitely give an answer to that development. After Russia has occupied and annexed, is that how you say it? Annexed? Yeah. Annexed the peninsula, I cannot. Crimea. We know that defense of our own territory has come back again. You know, after the 90s, when the wall fell and it was propagated the end of history, we thought that would never happen again. But we cannot trust the Russians completely. I do not believe that we should have an arms race, a new arms race like in the Cold War, but we have to be careful and we have to be watchful and make sure that the Europeans will preserve their self-determination and their freedom. And therefore we need to spend more effort and also more money in Germany in defense, but we will not spend 60 billion euros in order to meet the 2% goal of NATO. I suggested that we will do more. We're already in the process of doing so, but at the same time we have to raise our the financial means for economic cooperation and humanitarian aid. That also is important for our security, not only military, but also, and therefore the Social Democratic Party has defined the rule for every single euro that is additionally spent for military purposes, we have to spend another euro for economic aid, economic cooperation and humanitarian aid. By the way, I believe a European army, we have now more than 20 different concepts of defense. A European army you could raise synergies that will produce more security for less money. That is for sure.
There's a hand here and then a hand there.
My name is Karl Seemann. Thank you a lot for your lecture and for the commemoration of Adam von Trott more in general. I would like to question the viability of a European army at the moment and would like to ask if it wouldn't be necessary to think about a further democratization before thinking about building a European army when there's no democratical legitimated institution which is able to control such an army. Thank you.
That's a good question, because in Germany we have what we call a parliamentarian army. The army cannot set a foot on any other country unless the parliament has allowed to do so. A dozen times per year we have to make these decisions. And for the German members of parliament, very often these decisions are complicated. It's free. I mean, we have no discipline of the parliamentary groups. Everybody has to decide according to their conscientious. It's a conscientious decision.
Yeah.
Conscience decision based on conscience. Everybody, you take responsibility. It's a different thing. I mean, if the parliamentarians have to take responsibility for the soldiers and for what the soldiers do, not only the government, but everybody in the parliament. That is a good thing. We do not want to live without that. It's part of our constitution. And if we have a European army, we would have to find a solution how to let the European parliaments participate. And there's a lot of movement in these days. Before I came to London, I was in Paris. We had a meeting of the leaderships of the two parliaments, French and German. And after months of discussions, we found a consensus on a document that about the cooperation of the two parliaments. And this is a really innovative and completely new thing that I don't know if that exists someplace else in the world. Once our two parliaments have passed that treaty, we will form a parliamentary assembly of both parliaments. 50 MPs from Germany, 50 from the Assemblée Nationale in Paris, and they will assemble at least twice a year and debate about all issues they wish to debate about. They cannot make final decisions, but they can give recommendations. So in other places, the European countries, the cooperation gets closer. And I think that is not a body that can take over the decision for a European army, but it is an example that we can further develop our democratic institutions and international cooperation and multilateralism.
Maybe this is a soft way that we could start to come back and say, we know we have thrown away our power of decision in Europe, but can we have some conversation?
Yeah.
So there's a question up here somewhere, yeah.
Hi, my name's Aubrey Chatriot. I'm a second-year archaeology and anthropology student at St. Hugh's College. I'm half French and half Swedish. I don't have a British citizenship, so I'm more or less European, and I very much feel so. I also voted for the first time in my life for Emmanuel Macron, so I feel very personally about standing up to right-wing politics and representing liberal democracy, as you say in your speech, which was very inspiring. Thank you. My question is, in the face of populist movements and this kind of sentiment that goes against the values that Europe, Germany, France, Sweden, Britain should stand for, what is your opinion on institutions like Oxford inviting speakers such as Steve Bannon to the Oxford Union, and whether or not you think that kind of giving them a platform, giving these ideas a platform to speak on is relevant in a time like ours now? Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting question. To invite these people and reveal them could be useful. And who else could reveal those people better than the academic and intellectual surrounding of universities? Actually, I would be more worried if the union of sea workers, for example, would invite those people. They would have a bad influence, probably. Or other surroundings. I mean, I don't want to be. I think everybody. I do not want to be überheblich. Many Germans here. I don't want to be arrogant, but it's a decision. I do not want to comment on that ultimately, because it could be useful, and if it's a good event and clear confrontation. If that is not, then it is not useful. So it depends on the circumstances. We have the problem in the German parliament. As a vice president, I'm in charge of that. How do we deal with that new right-wing party? And of course, I mean, they are elected by voters, so they have rights according to the constitution, and we have to respect the rights. We cannot violate our own rules in order to fight them. We cannot betray our own values. So we have to give them all the rights they have, but that doesn't mean that you have to be friendly towards them. That doesn't mean that you cannot confront them. Our parliament, for example, we are a rather noble type of parliament, not as confrontative as a House of Commons, not as aggressive. But that changed when the new people came. We used to have differences in opinion and a debate about our differences in opinion to all kinds of issues. Now we have a difference, we have a conflict in values, we have a conflict in attitudes. So we have very basic debates, very emotional and very interesting debates in the German Bundestag. And we need to confront the populist people. That's the only way to show that they do not have any solution and that they are not interested in solutions, that they want to mobilize emotions, and that they are biased, and that they will destroy the freedom and the tolerance and the respect of our society.
We've got time for one more. I can see a hand there. Oh, I'll have two more. There's a hand there and a hand there.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's a hand on this side.
Hi, Simon Morrow, student from the Mansfield student from the 1970s, and active in Liberal Democrat politics for the last 30 years. So very much caught up in the Brexit debate. If, as is likely, the disaster happens and we come out, and but opinion moves towards coming back in, and we have to fight a referendum to come back in, the expectation would be that Britain would have to adopt the euro, and that will make life very difficult because a lot of people will find that hard to take. Do you think it would be possible for Britain to come back in without adopting the euro?
Well, definitely would. One thing would happen if Britain would not only rejoin the European Union, but also for the first time be member of the Eurozone. The euro would become stronger. Of course, it would strengthen the euro. It would be a great thing, and together with Great Britain, we also can make clear that that everybody is doing its homework in the member states of the eurozone. But I don't think that that would be a precondition for re-entering the European Union. Of course not. Well. A new comeback of Great Britain probably would, it might even be motivated by being also a member of a strong Eurozone. Why not? I mean,
I'm quite interested.
but
though,
we would take you without that also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is that? Do you think that's sort of an expression of friendliness and hope for close ties on your part, or do you think that's actually the case? Because I was speaking to David Edward, who was the British judge for many years on the European Court of Justice, who said he thought we would never be allowed back in with all our opt-outs. I think, listen, you've been a thorn in our side inside. If you want to come back, enough of your special pleading. You see the error of your ways if you want to, but you will see the error of your ways and you'll come back in on the same rules as everyone else. And I just wonder how strong a sentiment there may be of that, because we have tied everyone else in Europe up for a very long time in a lot of time-consuming and expensive negotiation, and weakened everyone.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, we did have a negotiation on that special deal that was achieved by David Cameron, and I would say, well, if there is well, now you have only, there are not too many options right now. The problem is, you said you're ashamed of your government. I would say once the decision was made and the framework of the leave decision was clear, that they started to negotiate, they found out that there is no good solution. It is impossible. Tony Blair put it that way. It's either it doesn't make any sense, or it is painful. There's nothing in between. And so if the government would decide, or if the British people would decide to come back, there would have to be fair negotiations. And, every country does have special regulations and special deals. In the main part of the European treaties, you cannot compromise. But I think everybody would. I don't see any member state that would not be happy about the Brits to come back, and then we also would have to compromise in fair negotiations.
Yeah.
Fair deal.
There was a question up here, I think.
My name is Christian Wachter. I'm a PhD student from the University of Göttingen. And I want to thank you for your inspiring talk. And I wanted to come back to the point of European identity, or the many identities you can have. When we talk about polarization in our societies and talk about irrational fears that dominate also the discourse in parts, then we can watch that the European ideals and ideas are having less and less grasp in parts of our societies, which truly is a shame. And one way to consider this problem is also as a problem of communication. And we can hear that in the discourses frequently. And I wanted to know if you think that the problem is also a problem of communication coming from the European Union or from the pro-European governments. We see how the European idea is transmitted to the peoples, and in a way to foster this identification, to give a kind of nutrition for identification building. Is this done in these times especially? Is this done in a sufficient way? I mean, there are certain aspects to be regarded in this context. One is also that many people have the impression that the politicians that are sent to Brussels, for instance, are politicians not well known. So there's a certain amount of alienation, but also how the discourse of, or the balancing of national interests and the European ideals, which is spoken out in a very idealistic way frequently. How well balanced these parts of the discourses are, and where we can, how we can better this communication.
Well, I would say the communication of the European Union and about the European Union could be better. I notice that there is a negative framing of everything that is communicated with the EU. But there are also success stories, and they are not communicated as well. For example, I found that when the European Union decided that Ireland has to tax Apple, was it 14 million? It was a huge sum, 14 billion. That Apple cannot, put their surplus money in Dublin and protect it from taxation. So the European Union said that is a violation. It was not even a tax issue. It was a violation of state aid and competition. Is that the thing? Competition, fair competition. And that was a good thing. That was powerful. And Apple came along. So that was a good message. Another thing that is a rather for the young people, when they came up with that concept that young people can have a railway ticket for 4 weeks, and not only students, Erasmus, but also people who are in a vocational training program. So also blue-collar working people can, travel around in Europe and meet people and have fun and perceive Europe as a positive thing, and freedom of traveling and things like that. So we need definitely a much better communication, but we also need a better European policy. In the past, the European Union was in many areas very bureaucratic. They were performing bureaucratically and in the European policy, we have to focus on the big questions, not on the tiny questions. They should be clarified by the member states. Subsidiary, the principle of subsidiarity, that has to be realized and be paid more attention to. But now we have huge debates about the European army. I mean, that will be a very far-reaching reform if we come up with that, definitely. So there's a lot to do in Europe, and everything needs to be communicated much better.
We're coming to an end. I think Mr. Oppermann has sort of sung for his supper, but I can't help thinking that there are some fairly outspoken women in Oxford, and there must be a woman in this room who has a question. There's a hand up there. I can't leave it like that. Mine being the only female voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, Mr. Oppermann. My name is Celine. I read philosophy, politics, and economics at Corpus Christi College in my second year. And in your talk, you've talked a lot about the concept of liberal democracy, and you identified as key elements of this concept sort of tolerance, the principles of peaceful coexistence. And I would like to probe you more on that. So where do you see boundaries of that tolerance? Because you seem to have indicated that at some point there is no such thing as being tolerant towards, for example, authoritarian regimes. And as a German citizen myself, I do identify with the Grundgesetz, but also with Chinese roots, I do see the other side of the medal as well. So, how do you go about the fact that tolerance should mean sort of the acceptance of different worldviews, but also how that you defend a certain worldview as well? Thank you.
That's an interesting question, and it comes up every day. Because the question is, do you have different measurements? Do you have how do you call that in German? Unterschiedliche Bewertungsmaßstäbe. Do you have double standards?
Yes.
Do you have double standards? And for example, especially China. I mean, I admire the way the Chinese people in the Chinese government have built up this country and have built up economy. And they also are able to react to environmental issues, for example, that they are very strong now in renewable energies and many other things. And China was a country that did not really militarily interfere. It's now threatening neighbors a little bit, but they have not like many other Western countries, a history of military interferences. And and I don't believe that Westminster democracy, like Great Britain or Germany or other places, would be the adequate system for China. I don't believe that. And I believe that we will have different types of democracy and also probably different types of rule of law. We have to work with one another. I think we have a dialogue. We have a rule of law dialogue, Germany and China. We talk about different types of rule of law, what it means to have human rights, and in some cases we criticize Chinese government for not respecting human rights. There are many cases, of course. On the surface, there is quite a lot of freedom in China, as long as you are not in opposition to the one-party dictatorship. As soon as you are active in that direction, you you are as an opponent, you have no rights anymore. And we do not accept that. We have to talk about that. But we should not be as arrogant as to tell the Chinese people how they solve the magnificent problems that have to be solved in this country. I don't know if that is a satisfying answer, but in the daily, in foreign policy, it is, you know, it is always you have to balance the different aspects. Of course, I mean, the worst. Some people ask us to break up relations with China. That would be an economic disaster. It would also be a political disaster. So you cannot, for example, Russia, when we criticize Russia, just think about a situation when China grabs one of those islands that are very crucial, or who is the owner of these islands, and then we would have the debate about coming up with sanctions. And I always say it has to be an individual decision. You cannot start having sanctions against everybody, because all of a sudden you are isolated and your sanctions don't reach any goal. So foreign policy has to be pragmatic and have to be real politics. But you must have standards and values, so you are sure how you can judge what is happening.
All right, now I saw that there were lots more hands, but I think we better bring things to a close here. So thank you very much for a very interesting talk and giving us some hope that we will not be cast out completely into the cold, whatever decisions we may take, or some of us may have taken. Thank you very much. Those who are invited to high table, perhaps we can meet outside and gather our coats. But everyone else, thank you very much. Do come back to Mansfield Talks, and thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.